In this video we'll give you a summary of installing Milestone on a countertop. This is using metal lath over existing plywood. We butt the edges of the metal lath pieces together. We don't overlap them. We use screws every 4 to 6 inches on the edges and 6 to 8 inches in the field. The plywood is usually comprised of 2 layers of plywood that is thin set into each other and has misaligned seams between the 2 layers of the plywood. On the edges, when we apply the metal lath, we end the metal lath right at the bottom of the edge on the countermount edge as well as the front face edge. We don't wrap it around the bottom. Often the clearances for the cabinet doors don't allow for that much material to be applied to the bottom of the countertop in the first place. Once you have your metal lath in place, you'll be installing 2 coats of Milestone. We use our Milestone fill coat mix for this application. Usually we don't use any colorant in the mix. We use a stiff back concrete trowel to push the mix through the metal lath onto the plywood. You want to make sure that you get good contact between your mix and the plywood so that you later on have proper adhesion between all the different materials. The concrete trowel is great for the application on flat surfaces. On curvatures, you can see Don is using a putty knife instead. It flexes more. You can see that we had the holes for the faucets pre-drilled into the plywood already. As you going through the different steps of your installation, you'll want to keep those clean of mud. Just from time to time push with your finger or with a tool through the holes. As you saw, we did not wrap the metal lath around the bottom of the edge here, but we do want some reinforcement underneath the counter where the sink rests against the counter itself. We're using fiberglass mesh and a mixture of the Milestone base coat mix rather than the fill coat mix. It has a finer aggregate in it, and applying that layer to the face, a little bit to the top, and then wrapping it around the bottom. And you can see Don's using a plastic Bondo squeegee. It makes for an easier application in confined environments like this one. And once he's done installing 1 coat over everything, Don's going to come right back and install the 2nd coat. The area where he started the whole process has set up enough at this point to allow him to just put the 2nd coat over it, again using the concrete steel trowel. Part of that coat too is establishing your edges, and we're using a straight edge here to plaster up against, and then once that area has been filled in, the straight edge can be pulled back, revealing a very nice sharp crisp corner. You want to make sure that your corners are built right in the early coats so that when you do the finish you don't have to do any corrections on corners anymore. You can use a combination of a level and a framer square if you have to square off a section of your countertop. You can use that same framer square and check the top and the face of your counter for being square. You can even use that framer square to carve off the table and get it level, as long as you get to it in the right stage of the drying process. Carving and sanding your surfaces are the last steps prior to the installation of the finish coats. You want to make sure everything is level, everything is square, so you don't have to make any changes to the actual surface by the time you start installing your finish coats. The table has dried overnight. In this case we will apply a glass aggregate finish. This is a more advanced finish. The 2 layers need to be installed consecutively. The 2nd one will be applied before the first one has totally dried. Don is applying the 1st coat right now, so he's using the colored acrylic admix along with the hybridized cement and colored recycled glass. You want this 1st coat to be just as thick as the aggregate pieces in the mix, and that's why Don is still using the stiff back concrete trowel. That allows him to use the existing countertop as a guide for his trowel. After you have applied 1 layer over the whole surface, you can wait for it to set up to the point where you have color changes, and then you can sand the surface again. You can basically sand the whole countertop with 1 sheet of 50 grit sandpaper as long as you don't start too early. If you're too early, your paper will clog up and you'll easily find out that you have to wait a little longer. After you have sanded, you can check everything for level and square again and make any corrections if necessary. And then before the first coat is totally dry, you come back and you apply the second coat. The second coat uses the very same mix as the first, and you're essentially pressing the aggregate pieces of the second coat into the first coat. Don is using a corner tool to give the countertop a nice, crisp, slightly rounded edge. For this particular finish that we're doing here, we need to trowel the surface several times while it is in the process of setting up. Then we let it dry all the way and come back the next day to sand it, expose the glass aggregate some more, and proceed on to the sealers. The first coat of sealers is our Milestone Cementic Urethane. We're applying it with a pad and ragging it off right away. The urethane locks in the color and it prepares the surface for the subsequent application of our slurry coat. And the slurry is necessary on a glass finish to fill in porosities that are inevitable results of the hard troweling that we have done at the end of the second finish coat. The slurry is applied with a Bondo squeegee. It's a very liquid mix of just hybridized cement powder and colored acrylic liquid. We apply the slurry to about 1 to 2 square feet at a time, then we rag it off right away, and we follow that with a Scotch-Brite to make sure that there's no slurry left on the surface so that you don't end up with blotches as you proceed with sealing. After the whole countertop has been slurried, it will be sealed one more time using the Milestone Cementic Urethane, and that's the preparation for the application of the water-based epoxy. The epoxy protects against staining from citric juices, vinegars, oils and other substances commonly found in the kitchen environment. As you can see, we spread the epoxy also with a Bondo squeegee, pressing it into any remaining porosities. We work usually on about 1 to 2 square feet at a time. The epoxy is fairly sticky and fast drying, and you don't want to work on too large of an area because you have to rag it in, and if you wait too long it starts setting up and your rag will produce drag marks that will be left behind and become part of your finish. We usually apply 2 coats of the epoxy. We water the epoxy down about 20% to make for an easier application. After the second coat of epoxy has dried, we slightly buff the surface using a Scotch-Brite. And then we're ready to apply the Milestone Cementic Canduba wax, which is our final sealer. We water the wax down 50% again for easier application, and then spread it with a clean rag over the surface. After 2 coats of the wax have been installed, the final step is to buff the surface to a nice soft organic sheen.